Marcus Rivera had always painted like he was running out of time. In the autumn of 2010, his murals bloomed across abandoned buildings in Brooklyn's Bushwick neighborhood like wildflowers breaking through concrete. Each piece told a story of struggle and hope. Children reaching toward painted stars, elderly faces weathered by decades of dreams deferred. Hands clasped in solidarity against backdrops of urban decay transformed into gardens of possibility. His friends knew something was different that October. Marcus had grown quieter, more intense, working through the nights with a fervor that bordered on desperation. It's like he's trying to say everything at once. His girlfriend Elena had whispered to their mutual friend, photographer David Chen, as they watched Marcus layer colors onto a warehouse wall at 3 a.m., his breath visible in the cold air. If someone you love has ever disappeared without explanation, leaving only their art as a testament to their existence, you understand the weight of absence. Some mysteries echo through time, and if you want to hear how hope can resurrect even the most forgotten dreams, stay close and consider subscribing. The last anyone saw of Marcus Rivera was on October 15, 2010. He'd been working on what witnesses described as his most ambitious piece yet, a sprawling mural covering an entire side of an abandoned textile factory on Myrtle Avenue. The image depicted a massive tree whose roots spelled out words in Spanish and English. "We are still here. We still matter." Elena discovered his absence the way lovers often do, through the accumulation of small, terrible details, his coffee mug still warm on their kitchen counter. His paints laid out as if he'd stepped away for just a moment, his phone charging beside their bed, filled with unanswered messages and missed calls that would never be returned. The police classified Marcus Rivera as a missing person, but in a city where people vanish daily, by choice, by circumstance, by tragedy, his case became just another file in an overwhelmed system. Elena plastered his photograph on every surface she could find, organized search parties that dwindled as weeks turned to months, and haunted the streets of Bushwick, looking for answers that seemed to evaporate like morning mist. David Chen documented everything with his camera. The search efforts, the grieving friends, the murals that became impromptu shrines as the street art community left flowers, candles, and their own painted tributes to their missing brother. Art outlives the artist, David would say, photographing each of Marcus's works as if creating evidence of a life that mattered. But the city is relentless in its renewal. Property developers eyed the neighborhood with acquisitive hunger. Gentrification crept through Bushwick like rising water, transforming warehouses into luxury condos, corner bodegas into artisanal coffee shops, and the walls that held Marcus's stories into pristine surfaces, awaiting more commercially palatable decoration. One by one, his murals disappeared. Paint rollers heavy, with primer erased years of work in hours. The tree with its multilingual roots, his final unfinished masterpiece, vanished beneath a real estate company's billboard, advertising luxury living in historic Brooklyn. Elena and David tried to document what they could save, but they were fighting time itself. The media attention faded, as all attention eventually does. Missing person posters grew weathered and torn, their adhesive failing against rain and wind, until Marcus Rivera's face peeled away from telephone poles and construction barriers, leaving only ghostly outlines of glue. The street art community mourned him through their work, painting memorial pieces that would themselves eventually be painted over, erased, forgotten. Elena moved away in 2012, unable to bear the weight of walking streets that no longer held traces of the man she'd loved. David continued photographing the neighborhood's transformation, his archive becoming an accidental monument to everything that was being lost. The apartment Marcus and Elena had shared became home to a young tech worker who never knew about the artist who'd once dreamed there. By 2015, few people in Bushwick remembered Marcus Rivera. The walls that had once sung with his colors now displayed the sanitized murals commissioned by property management companies, inoffensive abstractions designed to suggest urban authenticity without the inconvenience of actual meaning. The neighborhood's transformation was complete, its history as thoroughly painted over as the art that had once adorned its walls. The questions that had consumed Elena and David, where did he go? Why did he leave? What happened that October night? Became whispered conversations among an ever-dwindling circle of people who remembered. Street artists, like their work, seemed destined to disappear into the city's endless cycle of renewal and forgetting. 12 years later, Sofia Martinez stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, a Grammy Award catching the morning light on the glass table behind her. At 28, she had achieved everything a pop star could dream of: sold-out stadium tours, millions of streaming plays, magazine covers, and the kind of fame that transformed ordinary moments into public performances. Yet the success felt increasingly hollow, like singing into an echo chamber that returned only the sound of her own voice. The music industry had molded her into precisely what it wanted: marketable, photogenic, controversy-free. Her songs topped charts, and her image sold magazines. But somewhere between the recording studios and red carpets, Sophia had lost the connection to what had made her want to sing in the first place. She found herself longing for the authenticity she'd abandoned in pursuit of commercial success. Her grandmother's words haunted her during these moments of doubt. "Maisha, fame is like sugar water. It tastes sweet but leaves you thirstier than when you started." Abuela Carmen had raised Sophia in a small apartment in Washington Heights after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7. Those walls had been covered with family photographs, religious iconography, and her grandmother's own paintings, amateur works that possessed more soul than anything hanging in the galleries Sophia now frequented. "Remember where you come from," Carmen had said during their last conversation before her death 3 years earlier. "Your roots are what keep you steady when the wind tries to blow you over." But Sophia felt rootless now, untethered from the community that had shaped her, floating in a rarefied atmosphere where authenticity was just another brand strategy. The call that would change everything came on a Tuesday in March 2022. Sophia's assistant knocked on her dressing room door backstage at Madison Square Garden, holding a phone with an uncertain expression. "There's a photographer on the line," she said. "David Chen? He says it's about some artwork, something about your neighborhood." Sophia almost declined the call. She received dozens of requests daily from artists wanting collaboration or endorsements, but something about the name Washington Heights in the message made her pause. She hadn't been back to her childhood neighborhood in years, too busy, too famous, too removed from the girl who'd once sung along to her grandmother's radio while helping with dinner. David Chen's voice carried a weight that immediately commanded attention. "Ms. Martinez, I know this might sound strange, but I think I've found something that belongs to your community. Art that was meant to be seen, meant to inspire, but has been hidden away." He explained about his documentation project, his years of photographing gentrification's impact on Brooklyn's art scene, his recent expansion into other changing neighborhoods. "I've been working with community organizations in Washington Heights, documenting the displacement of families, the erasure of cultural landmarks," David continued. "Yesterday, I was photographing the demolition of an old apartment building on 181st Street when I saw them throwing away what looked like artwork. I managed to save several pieces before they went to the landfill." The building he described was 1 block from where Sophia had grown up. She could picture it perfectly: a 5-story walk-up with a small grocery store on the ground level, fire escapes zigzagging up its brick face, windows that glowed warm yellow in the evenings as families gathered for dinner. The building where Mrs. Rodriguez had taught piano lessons, where the Martinez family had run their small restaurant, where 3 generations had called home before developers decided their land was worth more without them. "The signature on the paintings," David continued, "it says M. Rivera 2010. The style is incredible, street art technique, but with this intimate, personal quality. There are portraits of people from the neighborhood, scenes of daily life, but painted with such love, such detail. They feel important, like they are meant to be preserved." Sophia felt something stir in her chest, a recognition she couldn't quite name. "Can you send me photos?" "Of course. But Ms. Martinez, seeing them in person, they deserve better than a dumpster. They deserve to be seen by the people they celebrate. I was hoping, given your platform and your connection to the community." That evening, alone in her penthouse, Sophia opened David's email and felt her breath catch. The images on her laptop screen seemed to glow with their own light. Portraits of elderly men playing dominoes in small parks, children jumping through fire hydrant spray, women hanging laundry between tenement buildings, their faces painted with such tenderness that Sophia could almost hear their voices. One painting in particular made her hands shake as she scrolled. It showed a young girl sitting on apartment building steps, holding a hairbrush like a microphone, her head tilted back in song while her grandmother watched from a window above, smiling with pure love. The composition was so familiar it felt like looking at a photograph from her own childhood, but it was the background details that truly unsettled her. The specific shade of green paint on the door behind the girl, the pattern of cracks in the sidewalk, the way light fell across the building's face. This wasn't just any Washington Heights street scene. This was her street, her building, her life, captured by an artist who had somehow seen and remembered and transformed a fleeting moment into something eternal. The signature in the corner read, M. Rivera 2010, the year her grandmother had first started taking her to sing at the community center, the year Sophia had decided she wanted to be a performer, the year everything had changed. Sophia Martinez had not set foot in Washington Heights for 5 years, but the moment she stepped out of the hired car on 181st Street, the neighborhood embraced her like a returning daughter. The scent of sofrito drifting from apartment windows, the syncopated rhythm of merengue and bachata mixing with traffic sounds, the way Spanish and English wove together in conversations on every corner, all of it rushed back with overwhelming familiarity. David Chen was waiting outside what remained of her childhood building. The structure stood hollow now, windows boarded with plywood tagged by local graffiti artists who seemed determined to claim every available surface. A demolition notice fluttered in the March wind, its edges torn and weathered. The small grocery store where Sophia had bought penny candy was already gutted, its metal security gate pulled down like a closed eyelid. "Thank you for coming," David said, extending his hand. He was smaller than she'd imagined, with photographer's hands, careful, precise, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. His camera hung around his neck like a talisman. "I brought the paintings. I thought you should see them here, where they belong." He led her to his van and carefully removed 5 canvases from padded cases. In the fading afternoon light, surrounded by the sounds and smells of her childhood, the paintings seemed even more powerful than they had on her laptop screen. Each one captured not just the visual reality of the neighborhood, but its emotional essence, the dignity in everyday struggles, the beauty in simple moments, the profound love that existed in small spaces. "The artist signed them M. Rivera," David explained, "but I can't find any records of exhibits, sales, or even a full name. It's like he painted these pieces and then vanished." The building superintendent said the apartment where I found them had been abandoned for over a decade. Sophia studied the painting of the girl with the hairbrush microphone. The more she looked, the more details emerged that seemed impossibly specific to her own memories. The girl wore the same pink dress Sophia remembered having at age 7. The grandmother in the window had the same silver-streaked hair pulled into the same neat bun that Abuela Carmen had worn. Even the small plastic radio visible on the windowsill matched the one that had played constantly in their apartment. "Could this be me?" she asked quietly. David examined the painting with professional attention. The resemblance is remarkable, but more than that, look at how the artist painted the grandmother's expression. This isn't someone painting strangers. This is someone who knew these people, who cared about them. An elderly man approached from across the street, moving slowly with the aid of a walker. His face lit up with recognition as he saw Sophia, though his eyes quickly grew sad as he looked at the condemned building behind them. "Ay, Sophia, mira que grande estas," he called out. "I am Miguel Santos. You remember, I lived on the 3rd floor. Your abuela and I, we used to play dominoes in the courtyard." Sophia's heart swelled with recognition. Don Miguel had been a constant presence in her childhood, always ready with a piece of candy, a joke, a story about the old days in the Dominican Republic. Don Miguel. "Of course I remember. I'm so sorry about the building." His smile faded as he gestured at the boarded windows. 43 years I lived there. Raised my children, buried my wife from that apartment. Now they say it's not safe, but we know the truth. The land is worth more empty than full of people like us. David showed him the paintings, and Don Miguel's weathered face transformed with wonder. "Dios mío, these are ours. This is our life." He pointed with a trembling finger at a canvas depicting the building's courtyard during a summer barbecue. "That's my grandson Carlos, and there's Mrs. Martinez from the restaurant, and—" His voice broke. "And there's M.I. Carmen, your grandmother, stirring the pernil." The recognition hit Sophia like a physical blow. There, painted with loving detail among the crowd of neighbors, was her grandmother's face, younger than Sophia's final memories, but unmistakably Carmen Martinez, laughing at something one of the children had said. "Who painted this?" she whispered. Don Miguel's expression grew thoughtful. "There was a young man, un artista, who used to come around in 2010. Marcus, I think his name was. He would sit in the courtyard sometimes, sketching, talking with your grandmother. She liked him, said he had good eyes, that he saw people the way they really were." "Marcus Rivera?" David asked. Sigh, that sounds right. He wasn't from the neighborhood originally, but Carmen adopted him like she adopted everyone. She would feed him, tell him stories about the community. He was working on something big, he said. A project to show that we mattered, that our lives were worth remembering. Sophia felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align. Her grandmother had mentioned a young artist in their phone calls that year. Someone who was documenting the neighborhood's stories, who understood that gentrification wasn't just about buildings, but about the erasure of entire communities. Carmen had been excited about his project, proud that someone was taking the time to really see her neighbors. What happened to him? Sophia asked. Don Miguel's expression darkened. He disappeared. One day he was there, the next he was gone. People said maybe he went back to his family, maybe he moved to another neighborhood. But Carmen, she worried. She said he wouldn't leave his work unfinished, wouldn't abandon the people who had trusted him with their stories. The wind picked up, rattling the demolition notice against the building's wall. Sophia looked at the paintings with new understanding. These weren't just artworks. They were love letters to a community, testimonies to lives that someone had considered worth preserving. Marcus Rivera hadn't just painted their faces, he had painted their souls. There might be more, she said suddenly. If he was documenting the whole neighborhood, if this was part of a larger project. David nodded eagerly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. With your platform, your connection to this place, we could find out what happened to Marcus Rivera. We could make sure his work, your community stories, don't disappear like so many others. Don Miguel gripped Sophia's hand with surprising strength. Your grandmother always said you had a voice that could reach anywhere. Maybe now you can use it to bring our artist home. The community center on 182nd Street had aged like everything else in the neighborhood, worn at the edges but still pulsing with life. Sophia remembered the building from her childhood, when Abuela Carmen had brought her there for holiday celebrations, community meetings, and the amateur talent shows where she'd first learned that her voice could move people to tears. Elena Vasquez, the center's director, greeted them with the warmth reserved for returning family. Sophia Martinez! I remember when you were no bigger than my waist, singing for anyone who would listen. Her embrace smelled of Café Cubano and the lavender soap the older women in the neighborhood had always used. They gathered in the center's main room, where folding chairs formed a circle beneath fluorescent lights that had been flickering for decades. Elena had put out word through the community network, the informal but powerful system of communication that connected every Dominican family from the Bronx to Brooklyn. Within an hour, a dozen people had arrived, all of them carrying pieces of Marcus Rivera's story. Carmen Rosa, who had run the small restaurant on the ground floor of Sophia's building, spoke first. Marcus used to come for breakfast every morning in 2010. Always ordered the same thing, café con leche and tostadas with butter. But he wasn't just eating, he was watching, learning. He had this little notebook, and he would sketch while he drank his coffee. She pulled out a worn composition book from her purse. After he disappeared, I found this in his usual booth. I kept it, thinking maybe he would come back. The notebook was filled with quick sketches, faces, architectural details, moments of daily life captured in simple but expressive lines. Notes in both Spanish and English filled the margins. Mrs. Rodriguez's hands tell stories of 60 years of hard work. The way light falls through the fire escape at 4 p.m., golden, forgiving. David photographed each page while Sophia studied the drawings. There was her grandmother again, sketched from multiple angles, her expression captured with such accuracy that Sophia could almost hear Carmen's voice commenting on the neighborhood gossip. He was documenting everything, Elena observed. Not just pretty pictures, but real life. The struggles and the joy together. Jose Martinez, no relation despite the shared surname, had been the building superintendent for 30 years. Marcus asked permission to paint a mural on the courtyard wall. This was 2010, remember, before all the street art was fashionable, when landlords would paint over everything immediately. But he convinced me. Said he wanted to create something that would make the residents proud. He showed them photographs on his phone, pictures he'd taken of the mural before it was destroyed. The wall depicted the building's history through the decades. Families arriving from the Dominican Republic in the 1970s, children growing up on these streets, celebrations and sorrows shared in the communal spaces that made apartment living bearable. It was beautiful, Jose continued, but when the new owners bought the building in 2015, first thing they did was paint over it. Said it was unprofessional. His voice carried years of accumulated anger. They erased 40 years of our history in one afternoon. Ana Gutierrez, who had taught elementary school in the neighborhood for 3 decades, remembered Marcus differently. He came to my classroom several times, asking the children to tell him stories about their families, their dreams. He was especially interested in how they saw their neighborhood changing. The kids loved him. He listened, the way adults usually don't. She had saved some of the children's drawings from that period, pictures inspired by Marcus's visit. One showed the neighborhood as the children imagined it could be, with gardens on every roof, murals telling stories on every wall, spaces where families could gather and celebrate together. He was planning something big, Anna said. An exhibition, maybe, or a book. He wanted to show the world that this neighborhood was full of artists, dreamers, people whose stories mattered. He said gentrification only worked when people forgot that communities had value beyond real estate prices. The more they shared, the clearer it became that Marcus Rivera had been methodically documenting a way of life that was already disappearing in 2010. His notebook contained addresses of buildings that had since been demolished, names of businesses that had been forced to close, details of traditions that existed now only in the memories of people like those gathered in the community center. But where did he go? Sophia asked the question that hung over every story. Someone doesn't just vanish, especially someone so connected to a project, to people. Elena's expression grew serious. 2010 was a hard year for immigrants in this city. ICE raids, increased enforcement, fear everywhere. Some people think maybe Marcus got caught up in that. Maybe he had to leave quickly. Or maybe, Jose added quietly, he saw what was coming and it broke his heart. Maybe watching his neighbors get pushed out, seeing the murals painted over, knowing all his work would be forgotten. Maybe it was too much. Don Miguel, who had remained quiet, finally spoke. Carmen never believed he left voluntarily. She used to say, "That boy loved us too much to disappear without saying goodbye." She kept looking for him until the day she died. Sophia felt the weight of that statement. Her grandmother had carried Marcus Rivera's disappearance as a personal grief, another loss in a lifetime of watching her community slowly dissolve. The paintings weren't just art. They were Carmen's friends, neighbors, the world she had loved captured forever by someone who had seen its beauty. "We need to find him," Sophia said, surprising herself with the determination in her voice, "or at least find out what happened. These paintings, this project, it's too important to leave unfinished." David nodded, already planning. "I have contacts in the art world, people who track missing artists, cold cases. And, with your platform—" "More than my platform," Sophia interrupted. "This is personal now. Marcus Rivera wasn't just documenting my neighborhood. He was preserving my grandmother's world. The least I can do is try to complete what he started." The Instagram post went live at 8 p.m. on a Thursday, accompanied by a single photograph David had taken of Marcus Rivera's notebook page, the one showing Sophia's grandmother laughing in the building's courtyard. Sophia's caption was simple but direct. "Looking for Marcus Rivera, artist who documented Washington Heights in 2010. He captured my community's soul in his paintings, then vanished. If you knew him, painted with him, or know what happened, please share. Art should never disappear. Hashtag find Marcus Rivera. Hashtag Washington Heights remembered. Hashtag art matters." Within hours, the responses began pouring in. Sophia's 14 million followers shared the post thousands of times, and the story spread across platforms like wildfire. But among the noise of casual social media engagement, real information began to emerge. Fragments of memory from people who had known Marcus Rivera, clues to a mystery that had remained dormant for 12 years. A user named at Brooklyn_Walls was among the first to respond with substantial information. "I painted with Marcus in Bushwick in 2009-2010. Incredible artist, incredibly sad about what was happening to the neighborhood. He was working on this massive documentation project. Said gentrification was cultural genocide, and artists had a responsibility to preserve what was being erased." The account belonged to Carmen Delgado, a muralist who had been part of Brooklyn's street art scene during its peak years. Through direct messages, she shared photographs and stories that began to flesh out Marcus Rivera's life before his disappearance. "Marcus wasn't originally from New York," Carmen wrote. "He grew up in Los Angeles, studied fine arts at UCLA, but he said he felt more at home in immigrant communities here than he ever had in California. He lived in Bushwick with his girlfriend Elena. I don't remember her last name, but she was a teacher, I think. They were talking about marriage. David Chin, who had become Sophia's partner in the investigation, reached out to Carmen directly. Through a video call, she painted a picture of Marcus as an artist driven by social justice, someone who saw his work as activism rather than decoration. He was obsessed with permanence, Carmen explained, her own paintings visible on the walls behind her. Most street artists accept that their work is temporary, but Marcus couldn't stand watching his murals get painted over. He started photographing everything obsessively, creating archives. He said if the walls couldn't preserve the community's stories, then documentation had to. This led them to their first major breakthrough. Carmen remembered that Marcus had been working with a documentary filmmaker in 2010, someone who was creating a film about gentrification's impact on New York's artistic communities. The filmmaker's name was... God, it's been so long. Sarah something? She was based in Brooklyn, had this old warehouse converted into a studio. Sophia's team of assistants and researchers dove into this lead. After hours of searching through film industry databases, social media archives, and Google searches, they found Sarah Brennan, an independent documentary filmmaker who had indeed been working on a project about displacement and urban art in 2010. The phone call with Sarah opened another door into Marcus Rivera's final months. Marcus was one of my primary subjects, Sarah explained over the crackling connection from Portland, where she now lived. Brilliant artist, but he was struggling with depression. The pace of neighborhood change was affecting him deeply. He felt like he was watching communities die in real time. Sarah had hours of interview footage with Marcus from September and October 2010. He talked about feeling like he was racing against time, like he needed to document everything before it disappeared. But there was something else, something he wouldn't talk about on camera. Personal stuff, family stuff. He mentioned having to make a difficult decision about his immigration status. The immigration angle aligned with what Elena Vasquez had suggested at the community center. Sarah agreed to send digital copies of her Marcus Rivera interviews, footage that hadn't been seen since she'd abandoned the documentary project in 2011. Meanwhile, other social media responses were providing different pieces of the puzzle. A user in Los Angeles claimed to be Marcus's cousin and said the family had been searching for him for years. A former resident of Bushwick remembered seeing Marcus's girlfriend Elena putting up missing person flyers in 2010. A retired police detective who had worked the case offered to share his files. But it was a response from an account called @Elena_teaches_art that made Sophia's heart race. I was Marcus Rivera's girlfriend. I never stopped looking for him. Thank you for bringing his work back to light. The profile was sparse. Just a few photos of art classes and educational posts about community engagement through creativity. But the location tag showed Queens, New York, and the bio read, Elementary Art Teacher, Keeping Creativity Alive in NYC Schools. Sophia sent a direct message immediately. Elena, if this is really you, please call me. I think I'm holding pieces of Marcus's heart in my hands, and they deserve to come home. The response came within minutes. Can we meet tomorrow? I have things to show you too, things I've been saving for 12 years. That night, Sophia couldn't sleep. She stood at her penthouse windows, looking down at the city lights, and thinking about the invisible connections threading through 8 million lives. Somewhere out there, a woman had been carrying Marcus Rivera's memory for 12 years. Somewhere, an artist's work had survived in basements and storage units and careful hands. The social media campaign had done more than find information. It had awakened a network of people who cared, who remembered, who had been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. Marcus Rivera's story was beginning to emerge from the shadows piece by piece, like one of his own murals taking shape on a wall. But the most important question remained unanswered. Where was Marcus Rivera now? Was he alive somewhere, unaware that his work had been discovered? Had he started a new life, under a different name? Or had his disappearance in 2010 been final, leaving only his paintings as testament to a brilliant artist who had loved too deeply to watch his world disappear? Elena Morales lived in a modest apartment in Astoria, Queens, where the walls were covered with children's artwork, colorful drawings, handmade cards, and photographs from school art shows spanning more than a decade of teaching. When she opened the door for Sophia and David, her resemblance to the woman in Marcus's sketches was unmistakable, though time had added lines around her eyes and streaks of silver in her dark hair. I kept everything, she said simply, leading them to a converted bedroom that served as both art studio and shrine. Canvases lined the walls, some painted by Elena, others clearly by Marcus Rivera. A desk held neat stacks of notebooks, photo albums, and files marked with dates from 2010. People told me I should move on, pack it all away, but I couldn't. It felt like giving up on him. She had prepared coffee and arranged Marcus's belongings on her kitchen table as if setting up an exhibition. The items told the story of a relationship interrupted. Concert tickets from shows they'd planned to attend together, keys to an apartment they'd shared in Bushwick, a small velvet box containing an engagement ring he'd bought but never had the chance to give her. "We were supposed to get married in spring 2011, Elena said, opening the box with hands that still trembled slightly. "Marcus proposed on my birthday, September 15, 2010. He said he wanted to build a life creating beautiful things together. 3 weeks later, he was gone." Sophia studied the ring, a simple silver band with a small diamond, the kind of ring a young artist would save for months to afford. "Tell us about those final weeks." Elena's voice grew distant, as if she were reading from a script she'd rehearsed thousands of times. Marcus had been agitated for months. The neighborhood was changing so fast, and he felt helpless. Every week, another mural would get painted over. Another family would be evicted. He was documenting everything obsessively, but the documentation felt futile when the destruction was happening faster than he could record it. She showed them a map Marcus had created, marking every building in Bushwick where street art had been erased or covered. Red X's covered the paper like wounds. He called it the death map. Every X was a story lost, a voice silenced. But the art project wasn't the only source of Marcus's stress. Elena explained that his immigration status had become increasingly precarious. He'd been brought to the United States as a child by his parents, who had overstayed tourist visas from Mexico. For years, he'd lived in the shadows of documentation, working cash jobs, avoiding any interaction with government agencies. In 2010, enforcement was getting stricter. Marcus was terrified of being deported, but he was also terrified of remaining underground forever. He wanted to apply for legal status, but he was afraid the application process would expose him to deportation. Elena's voice cracked. "I tried to convince him that we could find a way, that lawyers existed who specialized in these cases, but Marcus had seen too many friends disappear into the system." The final argument came on October 10, 2010. Elena had found information about a lawyer who helped undocumented artists apply for visas based on their cultural contributions to American communities. She thought it might be Marcus's path to legal residency, a way for him to continue his work without fear. He exploded, Elena remembered. Said I didn't understand, that the system was designed to destroy people like him, that getting lawyers involved would only speed up his deportation. He accused me of being naive, of not understanding what it meant to live without papers in this country. They had fought bitterly, Elena insisting that hiding wasn't sustainable, Marcus arguing that exposure meant destruction. The fight ended with Marcus storming out of their apartment, telling Elena he needed space to think, to figure out what to do. That was October 10th. I saw him 3 more times after that. Once when he came back for clothes, once when we tried to talk through our problems, and once on October 15th when he said he'd made a decision about his future. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I thought he meant he'd decided to trust the legal process, to let me help him find a path to documentation. I thought we were going to be okay. Instead, Marcus had vanished that night, leaving behind only a note that Elena had memorized word for word. Elena, I love you more than art, more than life. But love isn't enough to solve impossible problems. I can't watch our community disappear while living in fear of disappearing myself. I have to find another way. Don't look for me. Build the beautiful life you deserve. M. She had found the note on their kitchen counter the next morning, along with his apartment keys and the engagement ring. His art supplies were gone, as were his few personal possessions and the documentation he'd been creating of the neighborhood's transformation. I looked for him everywhere, Elena continued. I called hospitals, shelters, police stations. I contacted his family in Los Angeles, though they'd been estranged for years. I hired a private investigator, with money I didn't have. Nothing. It was like he'd never existed. David asked the question they were all thinking. Do you believe he left voluntarily? Elena considered for a long moment. Marcus was deeply depressed, but he wasn't suicidal. He was passionate about his work, about documenting stories that needed to be preserved. I think he got scared. I think he believed he had to choose between living in fear and disappearing entirely, and he chose disappearance. She showed them a final item, a small painting Marcus had left hidden in their shared studio space, discovered weeks after his disappearance. It depicted the two of them sitting on the fire escape of their Bushwick apartment, Elena reading while Marcus sketched, the city spreading out below them like a promise of infinite possibility. On the back, in Marcus's handwriting, were the words, "For Elena, you were my home when I had no country. If I can't stay, at least this moment is forever." Sophia felt tears she hadn't expected. This wasn't just the story of a missing artist. It was a love story interrupted by forces larger than two people could overcome. Marcus Rivera hadn't just documented his community's disappearance. He had become part of that disappearance, another casualty of systems designed to erase rather than preserve. "He's still out there," Elena said with quiet conviction. "I feel it. Maybe he found a way to build a new life somewhere else. Maybe he's creating art under a different name. But Marcus Rivera, the man who loved so hard it hurt, he's still in the world somewhere." Sophia looked around the room that Elena had maintained as a monument to interrupted dreams. "Then we find him. We finish what he started, and we bring him home." The documentary footage Sarah Brennan had sent revealed a Marcus Rivera that neither Elena nor the Washington Heights community had fully known, an artist wrestling with questions of identity, belonging, and purpose that went deeper than immigration status or neighborhood gentrification. In grainy digital video, Marcus spoke with painful honesty about feeling caught between worlds. "I paint these walls because they're disappearing," he told Sarah's camera in September 2010. "But I'm disappearing too. When you're undocumented, you learn to live like a ghost, present but not really there, affecting the world, but unable to claim your place in it. Sometimes I wonder if my art is just another form of haunting." Sophia watched the footage in her penthouse apartment, Elena beside her on the leather sofa, both women transfixed by the voice they'd been seeking. Marcus looked younger than Sophia had imagined, his face unlined by the years of uncertainty that would follow. But his eyes held a weight that seemed ancient, the burden of loving a place that couldn't legally love him back. "The neighborhood sees me as one of them," Marcus continued in the interview. "But I know I'm always one phone call, one traffic stop, one wrong turn away from losing everything. You can't build a life on that kind of foundation. You can only document it and hope someone else remembers." David Chen had been working around the clock, organizing the growing collection of materials into a comprehensive archive. The social media campaign had uncovered more than information. It had revealed a network of people across the country who had encountered Marcus Rivera in the years since his disappearance. Gas station attendants in Texas who remembered a quiet artist who painted murals for food. A librarian in New Mexico who recalled a man matching Marcus's description, researching genealogy and immigration records. A priest in Arizona who had helped someone with Marcus's name access social services for undocumented immigrants. The trail was fragmentary but consistent. Marcus Rivera had traveled west after leaving New York, apparently following a route that would eventually lead him back toward his birthplace in Los Angeles. But the most recent sighting was from 2018, and even that was uncertain. Sophia made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "I want to share everything publicly," she announced during a meeting with Elena, David, and her management team. "The paintings, the story, the search. Not just social media posts. I want to create something that honors Marcus's original vision." Her manager, Rebecca Stone, immediately raised concerns. "Sophia, this is a beautiful human interest story, but it's not exactly on brand for your upcoming album release. Your label is expecting pop content, not documentary activism." "Then maybe it's time to change the brand," Sophia replied. "Marcus Rivera spent his life documenting stories that mattered. The least I can do is use my platform to tell his." The project took shape over the following weeks. Sophia partnered with David to create a multimedia exhibition, combining Marcus's recovered paintings with contemporary documentation of gentrification's ongoing impact. Elena contributed personal artifacts and her own artistic interpretations of Marcus's work. The community center in Washington Heights became their headquarters, with residents sharing stories, photographs, and memories that filled gaps in Marcus's documentation. But it was Sophia's musical contribution that transformed the project from memorial to movement. She began composing songs inspired by Marcus's paintings, not pop confections designed for radio play, but raw, emotionally honest pieces that captured the complexity of immigrant experience, community displacement, and love interrupted by forces beyond individual control. The song "Ghost Artist" became her first single in 2 years that she wrote entirely herself, with no co-writers or producers shaping the content for commercial appeal. The lyrics drew directly from Marcus's documentary interviews. He paints the walls that are disappearing, documents the love that gentrification fears, Every brushstroke is a prayer for permanence. In a world that erases what it cannot monetize, he's a ghost artist, painting ghost communities, making visible what power wants to hide. When Sophia performed the song on late-night television, she used Marcus's paintings as backdrop visuals, ensuring that his work reached millions of viewers simultaneously. She spoke directly to the camera during her interview segment. Marcus Rivera vanished in 2010, but his art survives because people in his community saved it, preserved it, refused to let it disappear. If he's watching somewhere, I want him to know that his work is finally being seen the way he intended, as testimony to lives that matter. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hashtag Find Marcus Rivera began trending internationally, shared by celebrities, activists, and ordinary people who resonated with themes of displacement and belonging. Art galleries in major cities reached out, requesting to exhibit Marcus's recovered works. Immigration advocacy organizations used his story to illustrate the human cost of documentation policies. Most importantly, the search for Marcus himself gained new momentum. It was a teacher in Phoenix who made the call that changed everything. Maria Santos had seen Sophia's television appearance and recognized not just Marcus's art style, but Marcus himself. He's been teaching at our community center for 3 years, she told Sophia's assistant during a breathless phone call. He goes by Miguel Rodriguez now, teaches art classes for immigrant children, but I'm certain it's the same man. The community center in Phoenix confirmed that Miguel Rodriguez had been a beloved instructor since 2019, working with refugee and immigrant families to help children process trauma through art. His classes were legendary for their warmth, creativity, and the way he helped young people see beauty in their own stories. But when contacted about the identification, Miguel Rodriguez had disappeared again, this time leaving only a note for his supervisor. Tell them I'm grateful, but some disappearances are chosen for good reasons. The work continues under any name. Elena wept when Sophia called with the news. He's alive, she repeated, as if saying it would make the relief more real. He's alive, and he's still creating, still helping people find their voices through art. The Phoenix sighting reignited the search, but it also raised new questions. If Marcus Rivera was alive and working as an art teacher, why had he chosen to remain hidden? What was he afraid of? And was there a way to honor his desire for privacy while also honoring the community that had never stopped loving him? Sophia realized that finding Marcus Rivera was only the beginning. The real work would be creating a world where artists like him could exist without fear, where communities could be preserved rather than displaced, where love letters like his paintings could be displayed in galleries instead of rescued from dumpsters. The letter arrived at the Washington Heights Community Center on a Tuesday in May, addressed simply to the people looking for Marcus Rivera. Elena Vasquez called Sophia immediately, her voice shaking with excitement and apprehension. It's his handwriting, Elena Morales confirmed when they gathered that evening to read the letter together. The same careful script that had filled notebooks with observations about light and shadow, that had signed paintings with hope for permanence, now formed words on simple white paper. To Sophia Martinez, Elena Morales, David Chen, and the community that never forgot, I have been watching. I have seen how my work found its way back to the light, how strangers became guardians of stories I thought were lost. I have seen Elena's faithfulness, Sophia's courage, in using her voice for voices that are rarely heard. I have seen my neighborhood remembered with love rather than nostalgia. For 12 years, I have lived as Miguel Rodriguez, teaching children to find beauty in their own experiences, helping families document their stories before displacement scatters them. I disappeared because I believed invisibility was the only way to survive in a country that wanted my labor but not my presence. I was wrong about many things, but not about the power of art to preserve what matters. Sophia, when you sang Ghost Artist on television, you sang the words I could never speak aloud, that I was disappearing by choice, but that the work could continue under any name, in any form. You understood that sometimes the artist must vanish so the art can live, but art without community is just decoration. Stories without witnesses become whispers. I have learned that hiding protects the individual while abandoning the collective. My disappearance protected me but abandoned all of you. I am ready to come home. 3 weeks later, Marcus Rivera walked into the Washington Heights Community Center during Sophia's final planning meeting for the exhibition that would bear his name. 12 years had changed him. His hair now showed gray, his face carried lines earned through a decade of careful living in the shadows, but his eyes held the same intensity that had driven him to document disappearing worlds. Elena saw him first. She rose from her folding chair without a word, crossed the room and embraced him as if 12 years could be erased through simple contact. The room fell silent except for the sound of Elena weeping against Marcus's shoulder and his quiet voice, saying, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I made you carry this alone." Sophia watched the reunion with tears she didn't try to hide. This was what her grandmother's stories had always been about, the power of love to transcend time, distance, and impossible circumstances. Carmen Martinez had been right to believe that Marcus Rivera would return. She had simply died before witnessing the miracle she had faith would eventually unfold. "The paintings," Marcus said when Elena finally released him, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I never imagined they would survive, would find their way back to you." David stepped forward with his camera lowered, recognizing that some moments were too sacred for documentation. "Your work has been waiting for you. The community has been waiting for you." The reunion was tender but complicated. Marcus learned that his disappearance had cost Elena years of grief, that his community had mourned him as lost, that his art had nearly been destroyed by the very forces he had been documenting. But he also learned that love could survive absence, that art could outlive its creator's intention, that communities could preserve what individuals thought was gone forever. Over the following days, Marcus shared his story with careful honesty. He had indeed traveled west after leaving New York, working as a house painter and muralist, while avoiding any documentation that might expose his immigration status. In 2018, he had finally found a path to legal residency through an artist visa program, becoming Miguel Rodriguez in legal documents while remaining Marcus Rivera in his heart. "I chose a new name because I thought Marcus Rivera had failed," he explained to the small group gathered in Sophia's apartment, surrounded by his recovered paintings. "Failed to save the neighborhood, failed Elena, failed the community that had trusted me with their stories. I thought disappearing was taking responsibility for that failure." Sophia understood. "But you didn't fail. You documented our lives with such love that 12 years later, your work brought us all together. You didn't disappear. You multiplied. Every person who shared your story, who saved your paintings, who refused to forget, they became you." The exhibition opened 3 months later in a gallery in Chelsea, but its heart remained in Washington Heights. Marcus's paintings hung alongside contemporary works by artists he had inspired, community photographs collected by David Chen, and audio recordings of residents sharing stories about the neighborhood's evolution. Sophia performed Ghost Artist live during the opening reception, but she had rewritten the final verse. The ghost artist returns from voluntary exile. His community preserved what he thought was lost. Love letters to the disappeared become love songs for the living, proving that some disappearances are just long journeys home. Marcus and Elena did not immediately resume their romance. 12 years of separate growth could not be bridged by sentiment alone, but they became partners in a new project, establishing an arts program that helped immigrant children document their families' stories through painting, photography, and music. Marcus taught technique while Elena taught courage, showing young people that their experiences deserved artistic expression. Sophia's involvement in the project had unexpected consequences for her career. Ghost Artist became her most successful single in years, not because of radio play, but because of its emotional resonance with audiences hungry for authentic storytelling. Her record label initially resisted the political implications of her new artistic direction, but streaming numbers and critical acclaim eventually convinced them that authenticity could be commercially viable. More importantly, Sophia had found her voice again, not the manufactured pop confection that had made her famous, but the instrument her grandmother had always believed it could be. She used her platform to amplify other stories of displacement, preservation, and community resilience, becoming an advocate for the arts as documentation of experiences that history books often ignored. The final piece of Marcus Rivera's story came full circle when the developers who had purchased his original building in Washington Heights commissioned him to create a new mural for the luxury condos they had built on the site. Marcus accepted the commission, but with conditions. The mural would incorporate portraits of the families who had been displaced, their names and stories preserved permanently in the building's facade. "Gentrification tried to erase us," he told the crowd gathered for the mural's unveiling. "But art remembers everything, love remembers everything, community remembers everything. And sometimes, what disappears comes back stronger than it left." Don Miguel Santos, now 87 and still walking with his metal walker, stood at the front of the crowd as Marcus painted the final details. A small radio in a window, playing songs that connected generations of dreamers who had made these streets home. "Your grandmother would be proud," he told Sophia as they watched Marcus work. "She always said the music would bring him back." The mural was completed on October evening 12 years and 1 month after Marcus Rivera had first disappeared. Elena stood beside him as he signed his name, Marcus Rivera, 2022, in the same careful script that had marked his original documentation of this community's stories. If stories like Marcus Rivera's move you to believe in the power of hope and the strength of human connection, we share them because they remind us that even in our darkest moments, the melodies of love continue to play, waiting to guide us home. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to hear more stories that touch the soul and inspire the heart.